What happens when a billionaire real estate mogul sits down for what should be a simple late-night interview, only to find himself facing questions he never agreed to answer? What happens when the jokes stop being funny and the conversation takes a turn that nobody in the studio saw coming? Tonight, we're breaking down one of the most explosive interviews in late-night television history, a conversation that started with laughs and ended with a walkout that had the entire audience gasping. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think really happened here, because this story has layers that most people completely missed. The Late Late Show with Craig Ferguson was known for its unpredictable energy, the kind of show where anything could happen and usually did. Craig had built his reputation on being the guy who could make anyone comfortable, the host who turned interviews into genuine conversations rather than rehearsed promotional segments. His approach was different from the other late-night hosts. More personal, more willing to go off script, more interested in finding the human being behind the celebrity. That reputation is exactly what made this particular interview so shocking. Because when Donald Trump walked onto that stage, he was expecting the usual treatment. The softball questions about his buildings, his brand, his success. What he got instead was something entirely different. The audience erupted in applause as Trump made his entrance, waving to the crowd with that signature confidence, the kind of presence that filled a room, whether you liked him or not. He was wearing one of his perfectly tailored suits, the red tie that had become part of his brand, and that expression that said he owned every space he entered. Craig stood up from behind his desk, that mischievous smile already playing at the corners of his mouth, and you could tell he had something planned. They shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, and Trump settled into the guest chair with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Craig started exactly where everyone expected, with a comment about the building Trump had just opened, asking about the marble in the lobby, and making a joke about whether it was real or if Trump had found a way to make fake marble look expensive. Trump laughed, launched into a story about importing the stone from Italy, about how nobody else would go to the lengths he went to for quality. It was standard fare, the kind of exchange that could have filled 10 minutes of airtime without a single controversial moment. The audience was eating it up, laughing at Craig's jokes, applauding Trump's stories about deal-making and construction. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Then Craig leaned back in his chair, tilted his head in that way he did when he was about to shift gears, and said something that changed the entire temperature of the room. He said, "You know, Donald, I've been thinking about something. You talk a lot about winning, about being the best, about how you never lose. But I'm curious, and this is a genuine question. Do you ever think about the people who don't win in your deals? The contractors who say they didn't get paid? The small businesses that got caught up in your bankruptcies? Do those people ever cross your mind when you're celebrating another success?" The smile on Trump's face didn't disappear, but it changed. It went from genuine to calculated in less than a second, and anyone watching closely could see his posture shift. He said, "Craig, I think you've been reading too much fake news. I pay my contractors, I pay them well. And if someone didn't get paid, it's because they didn't do the job right. That's how business works. You do good work, you get paid. You do bad work, you don't. It's very simple." Craig nodded slowly, but he didn't move on. He said, "Right, but there are court records. There are dozens of lawsuits from people who say they did the work and never got their money. These aren't just random accusations. These are legal documents. So, I'm asking not as an attack, but as a genuine question. How do you reconcile that with your image as this great businessman who treats people fairly?" Trump's hand came up, that pointing finger that would become so familiar in later years, and he said, "Let me tell you something, Craig, and I mean this, with all due respect. You don't know what you're talking about. You're a comedian. You're a funny guy. I like you, but you don't understand business. When you're building buildings worth hundreds of millions of dollars, sometimes people try to take advantage of you. They do half the work and want full payment. They cut corners and then cry when you hold them accountable. I've created tens of thousands of jobs. I've built some of the most incredible structures in the world. And you want to focus on a few people who didn't get their way? That's not journalism. That's gotta television." The audience had gone quiet. This wasn't the fun banter they'd signed up for. Craig's expression remained calm, almost gentle, which somehow made the moment more tense. He said, "I'm not trying to gouge anyone, Donald. I'm just asking questions. And you're right. I'm not a businessman, but I can read and I can see patterns. I'm just wondering if you ever think about those patterns, about what they say." Trump leaned forward and his voice got louder. He said, "You know what, Craig? I came on this show as a favor. I could be anywhere right now. Any show would kill to have me, and I chose to come here because I thought you were fair. But now I see what this is. This is an ambush. You bring me out here. You smile and shake my hand. And then you start attacking me with these questions that have nothing to do with anything. I build things. I create jobs. I make America better. And you want to talk about some contractor from 15 years ago who probably did terrible work? This is ridiculous." Craig raised his hands in a calming gesture and said, "Donald, nobody's ambushing you. I'm asking you questions. That's what happens in interviews. You've been on hundreds of shows. You know how this works. If the questions make you uncomfortable, maybe that's worth examining. Maybe that's actually the most important thing we could talk about tonight." Trump stood up. Not fully, but enough that it was clear he was considering it. He said, "I don't need to examine anything, Craig. I know exactly who I am and what I've accomplished. And I don't need some late-night host who tells jokes for a living to psychoanalyze me on television. You want to ask me about my buildings, about my success, about the things I'm doing right now. I'm happy to talk, but if you want to sit here and try to make me look bad with these gotcha questions, then maybe I should just leave." The camera cut to the audience, and you could see people looking at each other, unsure if this was part of the act or if they were witnessing an actual meltdown. Craig's band leader was frozen, his usual commentary completely absent. Craig himself just sat there, maintaining eye contact with Trump, and said very quietly, "I'm not trying to make you look bad, Donald. I'm trying to have an honest conversation. But if that feels like an attack to you, maybe we should both think about why that is." Trump sat back down, but his body language had completely changed. His arms were crossed, his jaw was set, and everything about him radiated anger barely contained. He said, "Fine, Craig. Let's have your honest conversation. What do you really want to know? Because I have a feeling this isn't about contractors at all. I think you have some kind of agenda here, and I think we should just put it all out on the table right now." Craig smiled, but it wasn't his usual warm smile. It was something sadder, more knowing. He said, "I don't have an agenda, Donald. I just think it's interesting that you can't handle being asked about your past without calling it an attack. Most people, when they're asked about criticism, they either explain their side or they acknowledge that maybe they made mistakes. You do neither. You just get angry and accuse everyone else of being unfair. Don't you think that's interesting?" The silence that followed was deafening. Trump's eyes narrowed, and for a moment it looked like he might actually get up and walk off the set. His hand gripped the armrest of the chair, knuckles going white. And when he finally spoke, his voice had dropped to something low and dangerous. He said, "You want to know what I think is interesting, Craig? I think it's interesting that you make millions of dollars telling jokes, and somehow you think that gives you the right to judge people who actually build things. You sit behind that desk every night, and you mock people. You tear them down for laughs, and then you act like you're some kind of moral authority. That's what I think is interesting." Craig didn't flinch. He said, "You're absolutely right, Donald. I do tell jokes for a living. I make fun of people, including myself, most of the time. But here's the difference. I'm not claiming to be anything other than what I am. I'm a comedian who got lucky enough to have a television show. You're the one who goes around saying, you're the greatest businessman in the world, that everything you touch turns to gold, that you're this incredible success story. So, when someone asks you to back that up, to explain the parts that don't fit that narrative, you can't just call it an attack. That's not how this works." Trump uncrossed his arms and leaned forward again, his finger jabbing toward Craig as he spoke. He said, I have backed it up. I have backed it up with billions of dollars in real estate, with golf courses around the world, with a brand that's worth more than you could possibly understand. I don't need to prove anything to you or to anyone else. The proof is everywhere. It's in New York. It's in Chicago. It's in Dubai. You want to talk about some contractors who didn't like how I ran my business? Fine, but don't pretend like that's the whole story. Don't sit there and act like a few lawsuits somehow erase everything I've built. Craig ran a hand through his hair, and you could see him choosing his words carefully. He said, Nobody's trying to erase anything, Donald, but you have to admit it's a pattern. The bankruptcies, the lawsuits, the universities that got shut down, the charity investigations. At some point, it stops being about a few disgruntled people and starts being about something bigger. And I'm not saying you're a terrible person. I'm not saying you haven't built impressive things. I'm just saying that maybe, just maybe, the story is more complicated than you want it to be. The audience was completely silent now. The kind of silence where you could hear people shifting in their seats, where every breath seemed too loud. Trump's face had gone red. Not the healthy flush of someone enjoying themselves, but the deep crimson of someone barely holding it together. He said, You know what, Craig? I've been very patient with you. I've sat here and let you insult me, let you question everything I've done, and I've tried to be respectful because I understand this is your show. But I'm done. I'm done with this conversation, and I'm done with people like you who think they can tear down successful people because it makes good television. Craig held up a hand and said, Donald, please just hear me out for one more second. I'm not trying to tear you down. I genuinely want to understand how you see the world, because I think a lot of people don't get it. You've accomplished things that most people never will. You've built an empire from scratch, or mostly from scratch, and that takes talent and drive and intelligence. I'm not questioning any of that. What I'm questioning is this inability to ever admit fault, to ever say, maybe I could have done that better. Maybe I made a mistake. That's all I'm asking for. Just one moment of genuine reflection. Trump stared at Craig for what felt like an eternity, and you could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Finally, he said, You want reflection, Craig? Fine. Here's my reflection. I have made thousands of decisions over my career. Tens of thousands, probably. Have all of them been perfect? Of course not. Nobody's perfect. But the difference between me and most people is that when I make a decision, I commit to it. I don't second-guess myself. I don't sit around wondering if I should have done things differently. I move forward. That's how you become successful. You don't waste time on regret. Craig nodded slowly and said, But there's a difference between regret and accountability, Donald. You can move forward and still acknowledge when you've hurt people along the way. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. And I think what bothers people, what bothers me, honestly, is that you seem completely incapable of doing that. It's always someone else's fault, always the media lying, always the other person who didn't live up to their end of the deal. Never you. And it's not realistic. Nobody goes through life making only good decisions. Trump's laugh was bitter and sharp. He said, Accountability. You want to talk to me about accountability? I'm accountable every single day, Craig. Every time I open a building, every time I sign a deal, every time I put my name on something, I'm accountable. My reputation is on the line constantly. If I build something bad, if I make a mistake, the whole world knows about it. So, don't tell me I'm not accountable. I'm more accountable than you'll ever be. Craig's voice got quieter, more serious. He said, But that's business accountability, Donald. That's market forces. I'm talking about moral accountability, about looking at yourself and saying, I could have treated that person better. I could have been more fair. I could have been more honest. When's the last time you did that? When's the last time you actually examined your own behavior instead of just defending it? Trump stood up fully this time, and there was no hesitation in the movement. He said, I'm not doing this anymore, Craig. This isn't an interview. This is a therapy session, and I didn't sign up for that. You can sit here and pretend you're asking deep questions, but what you're really doing is trying to make me look bad in front of your audience, and I won't do it. I won't sit here and let some late-night comedian psychoanalyze me on television. Craig stood up too, and his voice rose for the first time. He said, "Donald, sit down, please. We're having a conversation. Adults have conversations. You don't run away the second things get uncomfortable." Trump's finger shot out again, pointing at Craig's face. He said, "I'm not running away from anything. I'm choosing not to participate in this ambush. There's a difference. And let me tell you something else, Craig. This is going to backfire on you. People are going to watch this, and they're going to see exactly what you did here tonight. They're going to see that you invited me on your show under false pretenses, and then you attacked me, and they're not going to like it." Craig's Scottish accent got thicker the way it always did when he was emotional. He said, "I didn't attack you, Donald. I asked you questions. If you can't handle questions, if you can't handle someone pushing back even a little bit, then maybe you shouldn't be on television. Maybe you shouldn't be putting yourself out there as this great leader if you fall apart." The moment someone asked you to explain yourself, the audience gasped. Nobody had expected Craig to drop the diplomatic tone to actually get angry. Trump took a step toward the desk, and for a second, it seemed like something physical might happen, but he stopped himself. He said, "You know what, Craig? You just made a huge mistake. A huge mistake. You could have had a nice interview tonight. We could have talked about my buildings, about my success, about all the great things I'm doing. Instead, you chose to do this. And trust me, you're going to regret it." Craig came around from behind his desk, closing the distance between them. He said, "The only thing I regret, Donald, is that I didn't do this sooner. I've watched you go on show after show where the hosts throw you, where they let you say whatever you want without ever challenging you. And I thought maybe, just maybe, if someone actually engaged with you like a real person instead of treating you like some untouchable celebrity, we might get somewhere interesting. But I was wrong. You don't want engagement. You want worship. And I'm sorry, but that's not what this show is about." Trump's voice went cold. He said, "This show is about whatever I say it's about when I'm the guest. Craig, that's how this works. I'm the draw. People tuned in tonight to see me, not you. Without guests like me, you don't have a show. So maybe you should think about that before you decide to go on some self-righteous crusade." Craig laughed, but there was no humor in it. He said, "You really believe that, don't you? You really think you're the most important person in every room you walk into? It must be exhausting, Donald, constantly having to maintain that image. Constantly having to prove you're the biggest and the best and the smartest. Don't you ever just want to be honest? Don't you ever want to just be a person instead of a brand?" The silence stretched out again, longer this time, more painful. Trump's jaw worked like he was chewing on words he couldn't quite spit out. Finally, Trump spoke, and his voice was different now. Quieter, but somehow more intense. He said, "You want honesty, Craig? Here's honesty. I am a brand. Everything I do, everything I say, it's all part of building something bigger than myself. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. Most people go through life being nobody, doing nothing important, leaving no mark on the world. I refuse to be that person. I refuse to be forgettable. So, if that means I have to be larger than life, if that means I have to defend myself against people like you who want to tear me down, then that's what I'll do. And I'll do it better than anyone else." Craig shook his head slowly, and something in his expression shifted from anger to something that looked almost like pity. He said, "But that's the tragedy of it, Donald. Don't you see? You've built this incredible brand. You've made yourself famous all over the world. But somewhere along the way, you've lost sight of the actual person underneath all of it. And I don't think you even realize it's gone. You've become the character you created, and now you can't separate the two. That's not success. That's a prison." Trump's eyes flashed with something dangerous. He said, "Don't you dare feel sorry for me. I don't need your pity. I don't need your analysis. and I certainly don't need your advice about how to live my life. You think you've got me all figured out because you read some articles and decided to play psychologist for a night. You don't know anything about me, Craig. Nothing. Craig stepped closer, his voice dropping to something almost intimate despite the audience watching. He said, "Then tell me, Donald. Tell me something real. Tell me one thing that actually matters to you beyond the buildings and the brand and the empire. Tell me about something that keeps you up at night, something you're actually afraid of. Because I don't believe for a second that you're this invincible person you pretend to be. Nobody is." For just a moment, something flickered across Trump's face. Something vulnerable and raw that disappeared as quickly as it appeared. He said, "You want to know what keeps me up at night? People like you. People who smile to your face and then stab you in the back the first chance they get. People who pretend to be your friend and then use whatever you tell them against you. That's what keeps me up at night, Craig. Knowing that no matter how successful I become, no matter how much I accomplish, there will always be people trying to destroy it, all because they're jealous or bitter or just plain mean-spirited." Craig's expression softened slightly. He said, "Donald, I'm not trying to destroy anything, and I'm not jealous of you. I promise you that. I have a good life. I have a job I love. I have people who care about me. What I'm trying to do, and maybe I'm doing it badly, is understand why you need all of this so desperately. Why isn't it enough to just be successful? Why do you need to be worried? Why does anyone questioning you feel like a personal attack?" Trump took a step back, creating distance between them again. He said, "Because it is a personal attack, Craig. When you question my business practices, you're questioning my integrity. When you ask me about lawsuits and bankruptcies, you're calling me a failure. When you sit there and analyze my personality like I'm some kind of lab experiment, you're trying to make me look weak. So yes, I take it personally. I take it very personally." Craig ran both hands through his hair now, a gesture of frustration and exhaustion. He said, "But that's exactly my point, Donald. Not everything is about you. Sometimes questions are just questions. Sometimes criticism is just feedback, not an attack. And until you can understand that, until you can hear someone say, 'Maybe you made a mistake,' without immediately going into defense mode, you're never going to grow as a person. You're just going to keep building bigger buildings and making more money, and feeling more and more isolated because you've convinced yourself that everyone is an enemy." Trump's laugh was harsh and humorless. He said, "You know what, Craig? Maybe you're right. Maybe I do see everyone as a potential enemy. But you know what I've learned? I'm usually right. Most people do want something from me. Most people are trying to use me or tear me down or get their piece of what I've built. So, if I've developed thick skin, if I've learned to defend myself first and ask questions later, maybe that's just survival. Maybe that's what it takes to stay on top." Craig walked back behind his desk, but didn't sit down. He leaned against it, arms crossed, looking at Trump with something that might have been understanding. He said, "But at what cost, Donald? At what cost? You talk about being on top like it's the only thing that matters, but what about connection? What about trust? What about actually enjoying your life instead of constantly fighting to prove yourself? Is it really worth it if you end up alone at the top of your tower, suspicious of everyone, unable to let your guard down even for a second?" Trump's response came quick and sharp. He said, "I'm not alone, Craig. I have a family. I have friends. I have millions of people who support me and believe in what I'm doing. Just because I don't bare my soul to a late-night comedian doesn't mean I don't have real relationships. And frankly, this whole line of questioning is insulting. You're not my therapist. You're not my friend. You're a talk show host who's trying to create a viral moment at my expense." Craig's voice got quiet again, almost sad. He said, "Is that really what you think this is? You think I brought you on here and asked you difficult questions just to get views? Donald, I could have had you on and let you talk about your buildings for 20 minutes, rolled the clip, and called it a night. That would have been easier for everyone. but I thought maybe foolishly that there might be something more interesting to explore. I thought maybe we could have a real conversation. The kind of conversation that actually means something. But you can't do it, can you? You literally cannot have a conversation where you're not in complete control, where someone might see behind the curtain, even for a second. Trump pointed at Craig, his hands shaking slightly with anger or adrenaline or both. He said, "You want to see behind the curtain, Craig? There is no curtain. What you see is what you get. I'm Donald Trump. I build buildings. I make deals. I win. That's who I am. I'm not hiding anything. I'm not pretending to be something I'm not. And if that's not deep enough for you, if that's not vulnerable enough for your little therapy session here, then I'm sorry to disappoint you. But I'm not going to apologize for being successful, and I'm not going to pretend to have problems just to make you feel better about your life." Craig's shoulders slumped slightly, and he finally sat down behind his desk. He said, "I don't want you to pretend to have problems, Donald. I just wanted one moment of genuine humanity. One moment where you weren't performing, where you weren't selling, where you were just a person talking to another person. But I can see now that's not going to happen, and that makes me sad. Not for me, but for you." Trump's face contorted with rage. He said, "Don't you dare sit there and feel sad for me. I have everything. Everything, Craig. I have more money than you'll ever see, more success than you could dream of, more power and influence than a comedian from Scotland could possibly understand. So, keep your sadness, keep your pity, keep your psychoanalysis. I don't need any of it." The bandleader finally spoke up, his voice cutting through the tension. He said, "Maybe we should take a break here. Give everyone a chance to cool down." Nobody watching could tell if it was a genuine suggestion or part of some plan, but it hung in the air like a lifeline nobody wanted to grab. Trump turned toward the audience, addressing them directly for the first time. He said, "You know what? You all came here tonight expecting a fun interview, expecting to hear about my success, about the exciting things I'm working on. Instead, you got this attack disguised as a conversation. And I apologize to you. I apologize that Craig decided to turn this into something ugly instead of keeping light and entertaining like it should have been." Craig stood up again, his voice rising. He said, "Don't apologize to them for me, Donald. They're adults. They can think for themselves. And don't pretend this is about entertainment. This is about you not being able to handle anyone treating you like a normal person instead of royalty. This is about your ego being so fragile that a few simple questions send you into a complete meltdown." Trump's voice went cold and measured. He said, "I am not having a meltdown, Craig. I'm responding appropriately to an inappropriate situation. And you know what? I'm done. I'm done with this interview. I'm done with your show. I'm done with all of it. You had a chance to have a great guest, and you blew it. Congratulations." Craig's response was immediate. He said, "If leaving makes you feel like you're taking control of the situation, Donald, then go ahead and leave. But we both know what this really is. This is you running away because for the first time in a long time, someone didn't let you control the narrative, and that terrifies you. So, what do you think really happened here? Was this a calculated move by Craig to expose something real? Or did things just spiral out of control? Was Trump justified in walking out? Or did he prove exactly what Craig was saying about his inability to handle criticism? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button, and let's talk about what this interview really revealed about both of these men.